Disgraced financier Bernie Madoff may soon be trading his penthouse for the big house. Madoff goes before a federal judge today. He is expected to plead guilty to orchestrating what may prove to be the largest investment scam in history. He faces up to 150 years in prison for launching what amounted to a $65 billion Ponzi scheme involving thousands of victims. Prosecutors are expected to ask Judge Denny Chin to send Madoff to prison rather than back to his Upper East Side penthouse where he has been under house arrest. We talked to Chin's former law partner about the case, who says the judge is up to the task in an extremely high-profile appearance.
The kind of activity that's been alleged by the prosecution here is enough to just turn anybody inside out. So the question would be, will Judge Chin know how to deal with that? No doubt about it.
Judge Chin's also expected to hear from victims willing to weigh in on whether he should accept Madoff's guilty plea and whether he should be allowed to remain free until sentencing. Madoff will not be formally sentenced for several months. With so many people financially ruined, victims of the Madoff Ponzi scheme are speaking out, mostly asking exactly how it happened. New York One's Roger Clark's outside Madoff's home on the Upper East Side this morning with that part of the story. Roger.
Pat, good morning. That's right. First, let me just let you know that the media obviously has invaded this neighborhood. There are live trucks everywhere and photographers everywhere waiting outside. They've been kind of penned off near the front of his apartment building as they await the possibility of him coming out on his way to court. But let's talk about the victims and the situation with that. So many people losing so much money, people losing their life savings, and many questions like why, who helped Madoff in the scam, and what happened to the money. Not just individual investors losing money, but foundations and charities were nearly wiped out after investing with Bernard Madoff, including the America-Israel Cultural Foundation, which supports young artists in Israel.
I fired two very close friends, staff in Israel that have been dedicated to us for decades in some cases. Many are without jobs. Hundreds and hundreds of artists that were expecting our support got very little in return for what they hoped. And it put us in a position of being in a crisis.
It's raw, it's real, and we just feel like nobody in the government cares.
And one thing that pretty much every victim of this scam will tell you is that they would like to see the system changed and regulations put into place that will help avoid this from ever happening again. That's a story from here on the Upper East Side. I'm Roger Clark. Pat, let's head back to you in the studio.
Okay, Roger, thank you. Bernard Madoff is on the move. He has left his apartment building on his way to federal court. He is expected to plead guilty today to masterminding a huge Ponzi scheme that has left thousands of investors without millions upon millions and billions of dollars. New York One's Roger Clark is with us from outside Madoff's home on the Upper East Side. We'll get to him first, and Vivian Lee is standing by where Madoff is headed. Let's go first to Roger for the story from his perspective. Roger, good morning.
Pat, good morning. And as you can imagine, it's quite a scene here on 64th Street. There was a couple of dozen photographers, both television and print photographers, still photographers here, awaiting the vehicle that Bernard Madoff has been seen driving in to court. It was a Kia SUV. It was actually parked inside a driveway behind a gate adjacent to his building. And then around about 10 to 7, we saw some movement, saw some people getting into the vehicle, and then it drove out. The police gave it an escort through a red light here at the corner of 64th and Lexington, and apparently Bernard Madoff on his way to court. And there he will be facing a judge, of course, and also facing some of the victims of this $64 billion Ponzi scheme, which he will be pleading guilty to. The questions that the victims have, there are many. One, who helped Madoff in the scam? What happened to the money? And of course, the big question is why? There are people who lost everything they had saved for years, not just individual investors, but foundations and charities were nearly wiped out after investing with Bernard Madoff. One of them, the American-Israel Cultural Foundation, which supports young artists in Israel. Take a listen.
We had to cut staff. I fired two very close friends, staff in Israel that have been dedicated to us for decades in some cases. Many are without jobs. Hundreds and hundreds of artists that were expecting our support got very little in return for what they hoped, and it put us in a position of being in a crisis.
It's raw, it's real, and we just feel like nobody in the government cares.
Now, one thing that any victim that you talk to will tell you is that they would like to see regulations put into place that will help avoid this from happening in the future. That's a story from here on the Upper East Side. I'm Roger Clark. Pat, let's go back to you in the studio.
Okay, Roger, and really not much chance for interaction with Madoff as he emerged this morning?
Not at all. He came through a back door. Once again, the vehicle was behind a gate and a driveway adjacent to the building. He didn't come through the front door to get to that gate. He went through a back area, got into the car, and took off.
Okay, Bernard Madoff is on the move right now, traveling down the FDR to the courthouse in...
Disgraced financier Bernard Madoff goes directly to jail without passing go and stopping for his $200. Sources tell New York One Madoff arrived at Metropolitan Correction Center. The judge granted the prosecutor's request that Madoff be sent away immediately following his guilty plea to all 11 counts against him, including fraud, money laundering, and perjury. Prosecutors argued he is too much of a flight risk. Madoff has been under house arrest since December after being charged in what could be the largest financial scheme in history. In the courtroom today, Madoff said he started the Ponzi scheme in the early 90s in response to a recession, but it wound up wiping out thousands of investors. He also tried to distinguish between legitimate and illegitimate sides of his business, presumably to protect members of his family who he says were only involved in legitimate dealings. Madoff faces up to 150 years in prison when sentenced on June 16th. Madoff's victims walked out of court cheering today, saying justice has finally been served. But it was a bittersweet day for many who lost their life savings. In the courtroom today, Madoff told the judge he cannot adequately express how sorry he is, and his victims agree.
I just felt that I was in the presence of evil, and I was relieved when they finally put the cuffs on the guy. That was the moment that justice ruled. I don't think when he spoke and he apologized, it was a pro forma apology. I think the only thing he's sorry about is that he got caught, and we're not sorry he got caught.
Every day is a struggle to survive. Many of them can't pay the rent, they can't pay their mortgages, they can't buy food. I mean, it's just horrible. It's just horrible what this man has done.
Victims lined up this morning to make sure they had seats in the courtroom. A few spoke after the guilty plea was heard, urging the judge to go to trial so it would be easier for officials to find out who else was involved in the scheme and where all the money went. Attorneys representing the victims say it could be years before they get their money back.